Welcome to Knife Chats. If you like this video, please take a moment to leave a comment. Thank you. Okay, this is going to be part 2 on the Dragonfly 2 by Spyderco. And if you notice, there's a lot of slip joints surrounding it. And that's because this is going to be taken from the perspective of a person who typically carries a traditional pattern slip joint as opposed to a modern folder. But also, when I first started looking at the Spyderco and VG10, I thought, well, there's probably quite a few YouTube videos out there that actually talk about how well the Dragonfly 2 cuts in VG10. But surprisingly, I was not able to find one that was worth linking to. There are plenty of people who just, gushed about how great the Spyderco was, or people who were just had negative things to say about the Spyderco, but nothing that really talked about how well it performed and how well it functioned, especially when compared to a traditional pattern slip joint. So that's what this video is going to be doing. It's going to look at the Spyderco Dragonfly 2 from the perspective of somebody who would normally carry a traditional pattern slip joint. So let's get started. Now, as just about anyone knows, I often will say that basically the modern folder is nothing more than a glorified folding hunter. And that would be the first thing I would say about the Spyderco Dragonfly 2 also. It's nothing more than a folding hunter. But then the more I looked at this, the more I started thinking okay, what traditional pattern slip joint does this frame remind me of? And I was looking at it, and if you notice the way the body of the blade folds into everything, and you've got the cutout here, and the first thing I started thinking of is, well, you know what? That kind of reminds me of a canoe. Notice how the canoe is, that you've got the extended bolsters coming up so that the blade doesn't catch on either end, and then you've got two blades instead of one blade, so that's a little bit different. But basically, if you look at it closely, you do kind of see that it kind of resembles a canoe. It's just that the blade is a little higher, so the back end of the canoe goes up a little bit higher in order for everything to fall into place. And then you've got the jimping here, but it does just kind of flow into it. So it's kind of like a little boat, maybe like a motorboat or something like that, or a speedboat. But it does kind of remind you of that boat shape of a canoe. Another shape that it kind of reminds you of is the copperhead. So here we have the copperhead, and you notice the copperhead has that little cutout also for the blade, and then the blade drops down. And typically copperheads can have one or two blades. So if this is a single bladed copperhead, you can see that the shape kind of reminds you of a copperhead. But it is also a lockback. So and here's your a smaller, this one is by Camco, a 3-inch lockback, but here's a Colt lockback, which is approximately the same length as the Spyderco here. I mean, the Colt is maybe 1/8 of an inch shorter, but you can see it could be considered like a lockback also, because it is a lockback. And so my main thought is the Spyderco Dragonfly 2 is a cross between a 3.5 inch or 3.25 inch lockback and a canoe. And so let's compare the lengths of blades on these two knives to the Spyderco Dragonfly 2. First up, let's get them open. So here we have the locking blade on the Spyderco and the main blade on the canoe. And if you notice, when both knives are open, the canoe is substantially longer. The canoe is 3 5/8 inches long. The Spyderco is just under 3 1/4, I think, or right at 3 1/4 inches long. Let's compare the cutting edges on those blades, though. If you notice, the cutting edge on the canoe is really not that much longer than what you have on the Spyderco. Perhaps maybe a 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch longer. So the cutting edge isn't that much longer. And you have You can get all 4 fingers on the canoe. I don't feel comfortable putting my finger that close to the blade on the canoe. Usually you have it back here, and you do know that the blade will obviously close, but you can grab it up there if you want to. But with the Spyderco, you've got really aggressive jimping, and it actually feels good there. And once again, you've got all 4 fingers on the handle, and the handle is a little more ergonomic than what you have on a canoe. Everything is nice and straight, whereas the Spyderco, it kind of folds, and you have that extra space here so your fingers kind of fall into place. Not to mention it is a locking blade, so that's where you can look at it compared to the lockback. So let's take a look at the lockback now. Okay, so here's this Colt lockback, and it's about the same length as the Spyderco. I think the Colt is about 1/8 of an inch shorter when it's closed. Really nice knife. One of the reasons I chose it is also because it has the cutout there that goes all the way through, so you have easy left or right hand opening on this blade. Nice little recurve going on, saber grind. As far as the edge goes, which one has a longer edge, you can pretty much tell right away that the Colt has a longer cutting edge on their blade, probably by a good maybe 3/8 of an inch or so. Nice swedge up there, that's really nice. Anyway, so it definitely has the longer cutting edge, even though the knife is approximately the same length. If you look there, if we can get the lighting to show right, you can see that lengthwise they're approximately the same length. But the difference is, if you notice the handle on the Colt, really that's the handle you have. Now that is enough to get, at least with my hand, all 4 fingers on the handle, but it's a small handle. It's not as good of a grip as what you're going to get on the Spyderco. And more importantly, if you notice with the choil here and the jimping, your finger is actually supposed to go there. That's where your index finger is supposed to go, as opposed to on this knife where your index finger is really going to go there. You really don't want to get your finger up that close because you actually feel like you might slip into the blade. You do have a little ramp there, so your thumb can go there pretty well, can also go there pretty well. But you can do the same thing with the Spyderco. I mean, you've got the jimping there, but really, you see here, all 4 fingers, the handle actually goes beyond my hand. If I squeeze it in different ways, it feels better this way. But that's why you've got a slightly shorter blade by about a 1/2 an inch, but it's because you've got a lot more handle because of the way the knife is designed. You're actually supposed to be putting a finger there, and you actually feel comfortable putting it there because of the way the blade is designed. You could grab it back here, but there's no reason to. It's safe to grab up here, whereas other knives, getting it in front of that area, even with this one here, you could, but it just doesn't feel as comfortable, and it doesn't feel like your hand really belongs there. And so you usually tend to put it back here. And that's the big difference between the lockback on the Spyderco and your standard slip joint or traditional pattern lockback. You really feel like you belong back here on the handle as opposed to up here on the blade. And so really, in this knife, you've got a what most people would say a 3 1/4 inch handle, but with the Spyderco, when you get right down to it, your handle on that knife is 3 3/4 of an inch. So you've got much more handle simply because part of the blade actually acts as a handle on the knife. And so that's what I see in all of this. You basically have a folding hunter and a canoe crossed to make your Spyderco Dragonfly 2. About the same size as either of those knives, a 3 1/4 inch folding hunter or 3 5/8 inch canoe. And you cross the two of them, add new materials and new steel, and you end up with your Spyderco Dragonfly 2. Now let's go ahead and take a look at how well this knife actually cuts. Now I'm not sure how well this is going to be cutting because I've been cutting with this knife for a couple of weeks and I really haven't even bothered to touch it up. So I know when it first came it was very sharp and cut paper no problem. But I have been cutting up all sorts of cardboard boxes with it. And also I'm on camera now, so everything is wrong when you get on camera and you just start cutting paper, at least for me. But yeah, it's still cutting paper pretty good, at least in my opinion. But really can't get a good grip on it. And like I said, I've mostly been cutting up all sorts of cardboard with it. Let me try some cardboard. So I don't know how well this is going to do because I've been cutting a lot of cardboard with this knife anyway, but and it never works in front of the camera, but let's see here. Not just plunging through. Yeah, that's going across the grain. It just slices right down through. Not a whole lot of effort to cut through the cardboard, and I've cut a lot of cardboard, like I said. So if you're going to be cutting a lot of cardboard with it, this is going to make a great little box cutter. Let's try a few other things. So now we have a 2x2 block of pine. As you can tell, the camera is between me and the pine, and I have no real leverage on this thing, so I don't know how well this is going to work, but yeah. Seems to be cutting into it pretty well. So if you wanted to whittle with this knife, I think you could. At least if you're doing a block of pine. I don't know if wouldn't do that with a lot of knives, but yeah, you can drill a little bit of a hole into the pine with it. Let me try something. So this is supposedly a 1x2. Really, it's 3/4 inches by 1.5 inches. And let's see what I can do here. Had to reposition the camera a bit because I usually have it on the same table, but if I'm pounding on something, I'm afraid it would cause it to vibrate. So probably not what you should be doing with the blade this short. It's getting in there a little bit. Let's go. I don't know if I can get it that way. Let's lift the camera up. Let's try and go with the grain of the wood and see what happens. If we can actually split this or not. Yeah. So the blade isn't doing too bad. I mean, it's getting into the wood. And you're talking about, I don't think that's what it's really designed for, but if you can get it that far in, then you can get another wedge in there and actually split wood with this too. So, I don't know. It seems all right to me. Yeah, so you could do some basic batoning with the blade, no chipping or anything. At least in the pine, seems to be doing pretty good with that. Let's cut something a little more sensible with it. Okay, last thing to cut. I'm going to take a piece of rubber hose here and just press down. So it went right through the rubber hose still. And if I were to slice, it cuts even easier. So I don't know. To me, cuts pretty good. I mean, there's a rubber hose. It's cutting right through it with no problem. I'm gonna See how easy that is? Look at that. So I can definitely cut with it. It does a really good job. I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's going to handle most of the things I can cut. If it can cut through this rubber hose, it'll cut through carpeting. It'll cut through meat, things of that nature. If it's going to be cutting into this wood, well, pine's pretty good. It's going to deal with that pretty well. And so I think all in all, for a basic everyday carry knife, if you're looking for something that you can open and close with one hand, takes up about the same amount of room in your pocket as a canoe or a 3.5-inch lockback, then the Spyderco Dragonfly 2 might be just the knife for you. Yeah, it's a modern folder, but for the most part, you're talking about a lockback and really a slip joint. That's the lockback. So it might look modern, but it's very much a traditional kind of slip joint knife, or just looks different and performs quite well, especially even in VG10. So if people are complaining about the VG10, it's probably because they're used to even better steel, but the VG10 is definitely better than your 440A that you find in so many other slip joints these days, and it's going to do a better job than your Case True Sharp. So that's my take on the Dragonfly 2 as a knife for the traditional slip joint kind of guy like I am. Is it an ideal slip joint? Well, that's really up to you. No dragonflies were harmed in the production of this video. The VG10 still held up quite well. There's no nicks or cuts or abrasions on the blade, even lines or anything else from cutting into the wood or through the hose. Everything functions fine, no wobble, everything is still nice and tight, everything worked out perfect. I have no complaints whatsoever for the Spyderco Dragonfly 2. Great little everyday carry knife. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Knife Chats, and if you did, please like and share it with your friends. Comments are always welcome. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode of Knife Chats is up online. Thanks again. Hope to see you soon.